The Dreamer by Pam Muñoz. Starting on page 85. As Naphtali watched him go, he noticed that Rodolfo was limping. 3 days later, Naphtali opened his eyes in the faint light before the sunrise. It was much too early to get up. He stared at the ceiling, imagining all of the things he might collect and bring home from the forest. Then the cracks in the ceiling opened and let the sky in. He found himself lying in his bed beneath the enormous tree with the wide trunk. He got up, put on his boots, and marched around the tree, counting his steps to determine how many it would take to make the complete circle. 43, 44, 45. His bed marked where he had begun, but no matter how many steps he took, he could not get around the girth of the trunk to reach it again. Finally, Naphtali decided to climb the gargantuan tree, hoping to find a way over it instead of around it. He was high in the branches when he heard Father's voice. "Naphtali, did you wear your boots all night long?" Naphtali dropped from the tree to the bed. Father hovered over him, wearing a dark gray cape, one Naphtali had never seen before. Naphtali sat up and stared at the boots on his feet. Wanted to be ready." He jumped to the floor, his heart beating with anticipation. "Slow down," said Father, laughing quietly. "You have plenty of time. Get dressed and eat breakfast, and wear something warm. The morning air will chill you." Naphtali pointed at Father. "The cape? Ah, yes, it is new. The company gave it to me for my service, the finest wool. When you are ready, meet me on the platform." He turned and marched from the room, the cape billowing behind him. When Naphtali arrived in the kitchen, Rodolfo was already sitting at the table, eating una marachetta. La Madre nodded to a place for Naphtali, where another bread roll waited to be slathered with jam. Sleepy-eyed, Lorita wandered into the kitchen, dragging a rag doll. La Madre picked her up, hugging her, and set her on a chair. Then she handed Naphtali a bag. "Bread, fruit, and cheese for later. It will be a long day on the train, and you will be hungry." "I wish I could go on the train," said Lorita. "You are too little," said Naphtali. "You must be big like me. Right, Rodolfo?" Rodolfo said nothing and looked only at his food. It wasn't until Lorita dribbled jam on her lap and Ma Madre ushered her from the kitchen to change her clothes that Rodolfo put down his fork and leaned forward. "Naphtali, look at me and listen carefully. When you go with Father, you must follow his orders. Do not get under foot of the workers. I did once, and he made me sit in the train all morning. And do not talk to the workers unless they talk to you first. Otherwise, Father will think you are keeping them from their work. Another thing, and this is very important." Rodolfo leaned across the table and put his hand on Naphtali's arm. "Are you listening?" Naphtali nodded. "When he blows the whistle, get back to the train immediately so that he does not have to come looking for you. That is where I made my mistake last week. When it was time to go, he had to search for me. When he found me, I was disobeying him. He, Rodolfo winced. I still have bruises. Do you understand? You do not want Father to catch you doing something wrong." Naphtali's heart sank into his stomach. "What were you doing?" For a few moments, Rodolfo gazed off. Then he let Naphtali's arm, pushed himself away from the table, and stood up. He took a few shaky steps toward the door, turned, and said, "I was singing." "Which is sharper, the hatchet that cuts down dreams, or the scythe that clears a path for another?" Under a veil of steam, Naphtali traveled on the chuffing train deep into the rainforest. As he looked out the window, he thought carefully about Rodolfo's advice. On the outside, he had followed all of Father's instructions. He had worn a wool sweater. He had sat up in front in the seat next to Father. He had not fidgeted or climbed on the bench. He had not spoken to any of the workers nor drawn attention to himself. On the inside, he jumped up and down with excitement. His stomach quivered, and he secretly kept pinching himself to make sure he was not dreaming. After several hours, the engine stopped. The sturdy men clambered from the train. Naphtali followed Father, stepping down into the world of conifers. His senses whirled, and he felt giddy. He could not turn his head fast enough to absorb it all. Tiny needles of light piercing the canopy, the untamed overgrowth of plants and trees, the musty smell of giant mushrooms, the crisp fragrance of pine, the sudden shrieks and flights of parrots. Father stood next to him, blowing his whistle and giving orders to the men who set to work, quarrying stone rubble. "See," said Father, "the men shovel the rocks onto the hods. Those cradles set crosswise on the poles. Then 2 men, 1 on each end, lift them and dump the rock onto the train cars. Another day it will be hauled to a stretch of track and will become the ballast to anchor the washed-out rails." Fascinated, Naphtali nodded and watched the men lift the hods and march to the train, their bodies already glistening with perspiration. "Stay nearby. I will signal when it is time for lunch." Father hurried toward the workers. Naphtali was grateful to explore alone. Reverently, he crept into the forest, but not too far. Even just a short distance from the train, it was as if he were in a great domed cathedral, in a world without sky. He stopped every few steps, examining the novelties and bellies of gigantic fronds, the luminescent wings of insect bird feathers, and pods that had dropped from the canopy. He collected pockets full of twigs and slippery partridge eggs. He overturned dead limbs to find the hollows where spiders lived. All morning, Naphtali wandered, inhaling the scent of wet leaves, wild herbs, and cinnamon. With a stick, he cleared a swath of damp earth and wrote on it. Slowly, he murmured the words to the trees, delighting in the tempos they played on his tongue. Naphtali looked around to see if anyone was near. If Father had heard or seen him, would he have thought him absent-minded? Was he doing something wrong? He smudged out the words and kicked the leaves back in place. He heard a rustling inside a rotting log and bent to peek inside. A gigantic horned beetle scurried from beneath the leaves. At first, Naphtali jerked back, but then he bent closer to watch it hiss. He had never seen a beetle so big or fierce-looking. "He is a monster, no?" Naphtali jumped at the voice. He looked up to see Father looming over him. Had he blown his whistle and Naphtali had not heard it? But Father did not look angry. "It is a rhinoceros beetle," said Father. "He is so strong that he can carry a log 800 times heavier than his own weight. See his horns? He uses them to fight. He is a king." He patted Naphtali on the back. "It will be time for lunch soon. Come back to the train in a few minutes." Naphtali nodded and watched him walk away, swaggering beneath the dark cape, with the confidence of someone who owned the forest. Naphtali turned back to the beetle. How could something so small overcome and carry a burden so large? What magic did it possess? As he marveled at the beetle, the shell contorted and bulged, growing bigger and bigger. Its legs elongated until it was tall as a pony. Naphtali looked on with fascination. Two giant beady eyes looked back. The rhinoceros beetle moved closer. When it was inches from Naphtali, it folded its front legs and lowered its hideous head, as if it were deferring to him. Then it made a tiny squeak. Oddly unafraid, Naphtali climbed onto its sturdy back and rode it through the forest, harnessing all of its strange strength.